Hello,
Okay.
Canada Files viewers. This is Aidan Jonah, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files, speaking to you, coming up with a great interview. We are speaking to Dimitri Lascaris, prominent Canadian eco-socialist. He's based out of Kalamata, Greece, and Montreal, Canada, much known for running in the Green Party leadership race 2020 and his stellar journalism, especially in West Asia, since the beginning of Israel's genocide escalation against occupied Palestine. So, Dimitri, thanks for joining to speak with Canfiles.
Thanks for having me, Aiden. Always a pleasure.
All right, Dimitri. So, we have a rather interesting story now, and it centers around the MacDonald-Laurier Institute. So, we're going to start with some questions building up to this, and then get to it. So, let's talk about the history that you have with the MacDonald-Laurier Institute, first of all. When did you first become aware of the MLI's behavior?
I was vaguely aware of the MLI, probably as far back as about 10 years ago, and noticed that they were frequently quoted by the Canadian media, and B, consistently took a neoconservative stance towards foreign policy issues, whether you were talking about Russia, China, Israel, Palestine, Iran, Venezuela, always on the hardcore neoconservative side of the issue. Also, military spending in NATO, I should add. And so I really didn't invest time and energy into coming to understand what this organization is all about until it trained its sights on me, and then I was forced, just for purposes of defending my own, reputation, to make further inquiries into who these people are, and that's when I really began to understand the organization.
Right. And so my impression of things is that this started around the 2023, the peace tour that you did, that I went and covered in Toronto, Montreal, and a few other spots. Now, can you talk about this visit that you did to Russia? You did the peace tour talking about this, and this
Mhm.
now is what got the MacDonald-Laurier Institute so angry. So why were you in Russia?
I will answer your question in just a moment, but it actually started before then. What happened was, in the 2020 leadership contest, I was supported by progressive members of the Iranian Canadian community. And after the leadership contest, this would be about 2021, at the Iranian Canadian Congress, which at that time and to this day is led by people who are anti-imperialist from the Iranian Canadian community and against the monarchy of the Shah. They asked me to assist them in connection with an attempt by the neoconservative wing of the Iranian Canadian community to take their organization over. And at that point, when my efforts to assist them became known to a guy named Sharuz, who's a senior fellow at the MacDonald-Laurier Institute.
Ave Shrews. Yeah.
Yes, that character. He began attacking me personally, very personally and viciously on social media. So it actually predates my trip to Russia. My trip to Russia happened 2 years later, in May of last year. And I'd never been to Russia before. And a fellow peace activist, whom I know you know well, Tamara Lawrence, had just been to Russia. And she told me that she was quite impressed by the country and its people. And so I came up with the idea that I would go there and spend a month in Russia, trying to understand both Russian society and the war, the progress of the war in Ukraine, and the reasons for it better. And so I approached on my own initiative. No one invited me to go to Russia. No one paid any part of my expenses or offered to pay any part of my expenses. I approached on my own initiative the ambassador to Russia, Oleg Stepanov, whom, by the way, I'm interviewing tomorrow in the Russian embassy for my YouTube channel. And he kindly agreed to put me in touch with various people, including people at the foreign ministry in Moscow. So I went there for a month. I met a number of people who are either connected with the Russian government or with the intelligentsia, academic community. But a number of the people that I spoke to, I wasn't directed to them by the Russian government at all. I reached out to them independently, or just, met them after I got there. And so I listened to a whole range of voices, met with a number of different people who were associated with the government and many who were not, some of whom were critics of the government. And then when I came back, I decided to do a speaking tour right across Canada at the invitation of peace groups. This again was not my idea. And that is when all hell broke loose. And the MacDonald-Laurier Institute, it wasn't Charouz this time. It was a guy by the name of Marcus Kolga. We can get into that character more if you'd like.
Oh,
He led
certainly. Oh, certainly, Dimitri, because the Canada Files knows him well, because the Canada Files has exposed him a few times. Now, thanks to the Canada Files, our audience would know that Marcus Kolga thought that Lenin was alive in the 1940s. He's obsessed with smearing Canadian conservatives who don't hate Russia, and he also runs a U.S. government-funded disinformation spreading website in service of fighting disinformation. So he's quite the character. And with that context, please carry on. What did Kolga do towards your tour?
Well, Kolga, along with a guy named Kyle Matthews, who runs this joke of an institute called the Montreal Institute for Genocide Studies, and another character who's at the University of Calgary. His name escapes me now, but he's one of these guys who holds himself out as a national security expert, is really just a pro-NATO shill. The three of them led a campaign on social media to have the venues where I was going to speak cancel our reservations for their facilities. And so what they would do is every time we published some notice that I was going to speak in some city at some site, they would then marshal all of their supporters on social media to bombard the management of the venue or the owners of the venue with threats that they were going to be subjected to protests, that they're going to receive negative publicity. Potentially there was some kind of a security issue with my speaking there. How dare they allow me to have a venue? And they ultimately succeeded in getting 4 venues to cancel on us at the last moment.
I remember Montreal. I remember Montreal distinctly. I
Yeah,
was there to cover it. It was
yeah.
also supposed to be in
And
the side spot, and ended up all going to a park. And obviously that was just one of the days.
correct. And the venue in Montreal was it was the upstairs section of a pub in the area, in the neighborhood where I live. I knew the owners and the managers of this institution. They assured this pub, and they assured me until an hour before the event that they were going to withstand the pressure. But it got to the point where they actually felt that their business was at risk. And so they pulled the plug, and we had to go out into a park. And as you'll recall, Aidan, there was probably 30, 40 very irate members of the Ukrainian Canadian community standing out there shouting obscenities at me while the police restrained them. So again, this was all to some degree orchestrated by Marcus Kolga and these other characters in the neoconservative segment of Canadian politics.
All right, Dimitri. Well, shockingly, you weren't thrilled about their activities, and from what I understand now, you began to become curious about the activities of MacDonald-Laurier Institute, and in fact, you began to file some access to information processing requests to the Canadian government about the MacDonald-Laurier Institute and their connections. So can you talk about the information you sought and which departments you filed requests to?
My request is very broad. It's basically any documents dating over a period of, I think, the past 3 years that are in the possession of Global Affairs Canada, which includes, of course, the Department of Foreign Affairs, that mention the name of Marcus Kolga or the MacDonald-Laurier Institute, any and all documents. These documents were due to me under the Access to Information Law well over 18 months ago. And I still haven't obtained them. I have received repeated assurances that they would be sent to me by a certain date. the documents are never produced by that date. They don't even send me a communication at GAC to let me know that they're going to miss the deadline. I've had to reach out to them on maybe 10 occasions and demand that the documents be produced. And most recently, about 2 weeks ago, when I sent another request to the person I had been dealing with, this Access to Information Officer at the Global Affairs Canada, she says to me, "Well, I've been removed from this file, and I've been replaced by such and such a person." So she gave me that person's email address. I sent him an email, and he said to me, "I'm just getting up to speed on this file." So now, because of the change of personnel on my file, who knows how long this is going to take? And I think what's going on here, I can't prove it, but that the MacDonald-Laurier Institute is objecting strenuously to the production of documents that are producible under the Access to Information legislation. And there may also be documents in there that are embarrassing to the Global Affairs Canada, which show the true extent of the influence of the organization of MLI in Canadian foreign policy making. So they're doing everything they can to drag this out and prevent me from getting my hands on these documents.
Certainly. I mean, I have memory of, I believe I tweeted out about this, about Colga, about Disinfo Watch getting cited by the Global Affairs Canada's rapid response mechanism years before today. Maybe I'll try to see if I can cite the tweet in the comments for the YouTube video. But the engagement is obviously, as you know now through the campus reporting, it's pretty deep through it's the CDMRN, Canadian Digital Media Research Network, because Colga's Disinfo Watch is a member of that. That network, $5.5 million Canadian. And of course, that's where Colga collaborated with that network as a whole to get that report bashing Canadian conservatives for not being wholesale haters of the Russian Federation. So certainly, I think there's gold to be found at the bottom of that pile. So
Absolutely. And you've been doing very important work in trying to uncover the funding sources of this organization, Aidan, which is, I'm sure, why they don't have a lot of affection for you either. So
yes, that brings back memories. I'm gonna go on to story time. There was an old social media guy, policy guy at the MacDonald-Laurier. When I was reporting on them back in, this was 2020, so a long time ago, I was criticizing their lack of where the funding sources were coming from. And I noticed that the Latvian Ministry of Defense was giving money, and around the calculations, I thought that hypothetically, it could be up to 80%. Now, I knew that this wasn't likely, but I was saying hypothetically, it could be. And they got very snippy, went after. Also, when the Campbells broke stories about their funding, they removed their annual reports. That's also part of the reason why you might have had a harder time finding them, Dimitri, is actually because they removed it after my stories on them.
right. And your stories revealed or helped to reveal that these characters who are constantly going on and on about foreign interference in Canadian politics receive significant funding from foreign governments, and foreign corporations. So who is actually, under the influence of foreign entities in this country? I would suggest that it's these neoconservative think tanks, of which the MacDonald-Laurier Institute is perhaps the most prominent example.
Yeah, and now, Dimitri, you and Tamara Lawrence made your own efforts to get financial documents. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so as a result of the Canada Files reporting, I think, again, I can't prove it, but I suspect because of the timing that this is what happened, you started to shine a light on what their funding sources were. So they changed their policy with respect to disclosing their funders, whereas they previously disclosed a list of major funders, not all funders, but major funders in their annual report. Their new policy, somewhere around 2021 or 2022, became, we will show you our list of funders if you come to our offices and request a copy. So Tamara and I separately, we weren't working in conjunction with each other initially. We went to their offices and we requested a copy. When I showed up there, it's interesting. Their head office is in kind of like an old house that's been converted into an office space in Ottawa, downtown Ottawa. And I walked in there. I found the offices of MacDonald-Laurier Institute, and there was only one person in their office. There was a young intern who was a very affable guy, and I introduced myself to him, and he said he knew me and knew of my work. And I proceeded to tell him that I'd come because I wanted to see a list of the funders. And I referred him to the page in the annual report, the most recent annual report, which articulated the new policy. So he didn't know what to do. He puts me in touch with a fellow, I think, who was in charge of the accounting, an accountant for MacDonald-Laurier Institute. And this man confirmed to me in writing that the list would be provided to me by email. And then at the same time, he acknowledged that Tamara Lorentz had made a request and that he owed her a response. And then about 48 hours after he confirmed to us in writing that we were going to get the list of funders, he advised me that they had consulted the organization's legal counsel and they decided to change their policy yet again. And this time they just were going to refuse to provide their funders to anybody, whether you showed up at their office or not. So they changed the policy right in the middle of my efforts and Tamara's efforts to obtain access to the funders list, which we were told we would be provided. So, you don't need to be a rocket scientist here, Aidan, to figure out that these people really don't want the public to know who their funders are, especially if the people who obtain the information are critics of the organization. And that'll tell you a lot. Probably what's going on here is that they are receiving large amounts of money from foreign governments, directly or indirectly from foreign governments and arms manufacturers, other foreign corporations. And they don't want the public to know that they are the ultimate hypocrites. They themselves are being influenced and directed to a large degree by foreign entities and governments, while they are creating hysteria about foreign interference in Canadian politics.
Certainly that is a possibility. Now, I want to add a quick clarifier. It was Brett Byers, who was communications digital media manager back then. He was the one who got snippy with the CAN files, and the CAN files had far less reach than it did back in the day. To really kind of wrap things up, which is this Colga's InfoWatch, being part of that network, CDIMRN. This Nexus, right, that's coming here. Canadian government, imperial think tank, disinformation expert, quote unquote, and this imperial diaspora faction. Think like Canadian Congress. What is this Nexus? How much of a danger does it pose to the democratic rights of ordinary Canadians?
I think it's extremely dangerous. And I'll give you an example that's, again, very personal to me. And that is about a month ago, Colga, along with two right-leaning senators in the Canadian Senate, one of whom is Pamela Wallin, and the other one, I believe, is Stanley Kuchar, co-authored an op-ed in the Hill Times, which is, kind of the go-to newspaper for the Canadian political elite and, policy wonks in Ottawa. And in it, without naming me and others who appear on RT, or have cooperative relationships with Russian think tanks like the Valdai Club, they said that we should be investigated by the police and charged with criminal offenses. They didn't specify what criminal laws should be deployed against us. They didn't say why there's any grounds to believe that we've engaged in any criminal activity. We haven't. But they evidently wanted to have the police powers of the state brought to bear against people like myself, and also Radhika Desai, a professor from the University of Manitoba, and her partner, Alan Freeman, who went to the Valdai conference in Moscow last year and then were interrogated by CSIS agents when they returned to the country. They want us to be persecuted. So Radhika and I, we haven't yet gone public with this, but Radhika and Alan and I co-authored a response to this Colga, Kuchar, and Wallin op-ed, which was, downright Orwellian in nature. And we submitted it to the Hill Times editor, Kate Malloy. And her initial response, surprisingly, was that they were going to publish it. She led us to believe in an email that they were going to publish it. Then after about 2 weeks, they hadn't published it. And she sends another email in which she says they're looking at publishing it as a 500-word letter to the editor, which would have forced us to, cut back considerably on our our response to this Orwellian nonsense that the paper had published previously. And then after that, we objected, said we deserve to have, to be able to respond to this, because ultimately the people are being targeted by it, even though they didn't name us. And then she just started ignoring us. So they won't even publish our response. I can't prove it, but I suspect that the editor, came under pressure either internally or from external, constituents, to not give us an opportunity to respond to this thing. So we have people out there who are calling for us to be prosecuted, investigated, harassed by the police and or by CSIS, and we can't even get a platform in order to respond to these anti-democratic positions that are being taken by Kolga.
Right, and speaking further of that, something that I noticed 2 months ago was that Marcus Kolga wanted you prosecuted for visiting Crimea and doing journalism there. Right, so there was some
Yeah,
question of ambiguity, not naming previously. There was no ambiguity. There's no ambiguity here. Right, and I mean, you could go into Kolga and his Estonian Nazi collaborator Apologia. That would take a whole 45 minutes into
yeah,
it,
yeah,
but people can read the Canfiles articles on that.
yeah.
So
And that was in testimony to Parliament. He did that, by the way. And again, you're right. He didn't. The reason why he doesn't actually name us, people like me or others, is because he knows that if he does that, he's probably going to be, met with a defamation lawsuit.
right now,
So
to
he's very.
clarify, I'm talking about something he tweeted publicly. It's another thing. It's another thing. But keep going. Yeah.
Well, did he name me in that tweet?
Uh, let's pull it up. Dominic Carty was talking about it, and then Kolga says, wasn't someone just tweeting that he was visiting Crimea? And then it includes sanctions related to Ukraine. And then Kolga says Canadians can indeed travel where they want, but if they travel to Crimea, there are consequences for doing that. So they're directly naming you, connecting you around the sanctioned punishments. So that's a very, very direct, no indirect, no nothing, like publicly there.
Right. Well, again, he says there are consequences for doing that. He didn't actually come out and say that I broke the law, but in Parliament, he pretty much said that without naming me. So again, this character is, I've said this many times, Aidan. The most aggressive proponents of censorship are the worst purveyors of disinformation. Nobody in this country embodies that principle more than Marcus Kolga.
All right, Dimitri. Well, I think that is a very useful place to leave this interview. So, Canada Files viewers, thank you for making it to the end of this interview. Dimitri, as always, thank you for making time for the Canada Files. And Canada
My
Files viewers,
pleasure, Aidan. Take care.
yes, Canada Files viewers, if you appreciate this journalism, please set up a monthly or annual donation to support this work. Goodbye, everyone.